The heat is still on.
Massive game.
New Zealand to win.
Great fit.
It's been a terrible year for the Wallabies.
We're missing an injection of life.
Stupid guys think they're so good.
Hello and welcome to Ruggamatrix International, episode 255. I'm your host, Djuro. This fellow over here is Benny Kimber. Hey, Ben.
Good evening, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. Gee, some Kiwis are going to give it to you tonight.
What for? Still tip the All Blacks?
Yeah. All right. Okay, so thanks for joining us again on Ruggamatrix International. Of course, before we go any further, this series during the Rugby Championship brought to you by Rugby Pass, the great boys there, and our Fantasy League competition. How are you going?
Hanging on to fourth, mate.
Fourth?
Hanging on to fourth.
Slipping down the table, huh?
No, I slipped to fourth and then I hung on to fourth.
All right, okay. Very good, very good. All right, so don't forget, log on there. Not just the Rugby Championship, you got the Aviva Championship, you got the Pro 14 and the Rugby Championship. So have a go at it. It's a lot of fun. We'll go into some details about it later on with Ben, and he explain how he's just hanging on to fourth place. All right, let's get straight to it. What is your strike issue of the week?
Thanks, Djuro. Two games on the weekend, two big games. As always, the Rugby Championship provides. The issue for the week has to be, though, did we just see the perfect game of rugby from the All Blacks? Let's be very clear here. This was the number one team in the world playing the number 5 team in the world who'd had their best start to the season for some time. South Africa had beaten France comfortably 3-0, had beaten Argentina comfortably 2-0, had a weakish hit out against the Wallabies for a draw. But from start to finish, well, maybe the first 10 minutes aside, the All Blacks team beat them in every single facet of the game. This was a shellacking. For those of you who are regular viewers, Bledisloe won this year. We were horrified with the way the Wallabies were torn apart, and we looked particularly at the way the Wallabies were picked apart. And we talked about, was this because the All Blacks were so great or because the Wallabies were so poor? And we had some evidence about why the Wallabies were so poor. There was a lot of talk around the defensive lines. We highlighted where. This right here, the Boks were just beaten in every single part in the game. You can't say it was schoolboy defensive line errors. They were beaten at the scrum eventually. They were beaten at the line out. They were beaten at the punch, the passing, everything. That they were knocking on, they were kicking poorly. This was one of the most dominant test match performances. And as I said, it was first versus third. It was the Springboks coming back, their resurgence. The All Blacks, so they certainly blocked the defensive line. The 0 was as impressive as the 57, I think. But the All Blacks were sensational, and they absolutely annihilated them, Djuro. And I didn't see that coming. I thought a dominant win, but I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't see that annihilation coming because we'd been hoping that South Africa were on the mend. There were some disturbing signs, though, from South Africa in the game, from a South African point of view, in against Australia in Perth. And I thought they were very poor against Australia. They certainly weren't the same team that beat France in that 3-test series. And, you know, I think what the issue is, it was a great first half of rugby. Now, on Saturday, I couldn't see the first half live. I just saw the second half. And when I saw the score, I thought, I'm getting ripped off here when I started watching the second half. And then I went back, obviously, and watched it. But they were on fire. They took their chances, you know, going from the first amazing bit of vision from Aaron Smith to really ignite the game. And that was just from a quick tap, you know. He decided just to run the ball and take a kick. So they were energised from the start. The All Blacks were amazing to watch. But South Africa played their part. They just weren't up to their great standard. But I will say this, just like Australia did in the second test against New Zealand, South Africa can fix this quickly.
I don't know if I agree with that. I do not know if I agree with that because, as we said a minute ago, that defensive line for the Wallabies in that first Bledisloe, we pointed to those errors and we called out Nathan Gray and we said that defensive line was clearly all over the shop and very obviously. And the All Blacks carved them up easily without being, I thought, absolutely unbelievably brilliant. They just picked them apart as a good team as they will. The Boks were beaten in every facet. I don't think the path back is as clear. We saw the Wallabies come back in that second Bledisloe, and in hindsight now, how good do they look for that piece, for that game they played in New Zealand in Bledisloe 2, where they actually got stuck back into the All Blacks and almost stole it away from them. But this right here, the Boks, their heads went down, they were beaten to the punch, and a real theme this weekend, we'll talk about the Wallabies and Argies in a minute, but the back row for me here, the loss of Jesse Creel was a really, really important loss. I was actually, up until the day of, I hadn't really noticed that he was out. I was thinking that guy there was going to be a key part of how the All Blacks might be disrupted, how the Boks could get in the game. I thought the form Yarko Creel, I said Jesse. Yarko Creel was in, on the ball, at the ruck. He was going to be important. But in every single part of the contest, post that first 10-minute period, the Boks were blown away. Every ruck, every line-out. I think they lost 5 of their line-outs. And, Marks is no dummy. Etzebeth is no dummy. Mostert, these guys, they aren't poor players. And they were just done.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful to get carried away with one event. And it was a great performance by the All Blacks. And, it was one of those nights where everything they touched turned to gold. I've seen them before. I was in the coach's box when we were trounced, as I was a Waratahs media manager, by the Crusaders. And we actually started well in that game, the Waratahs, and they put 90 points on us. So, yeah, the All Blacks were all over them on that night. But they were all over them for one night. And there's too much talent in the South African team to be dead and buried for the rest of the series. I will reserve my judgment until they play the return game in South Africa. Look, it's very likely that New Zealand will continue to trounce them, but I'm just not going to wipe them out yet. Just given some of the stuff they did all year, that was pretty positive. I just don't want to rub it out. I mean, otherwise, for me, there's nothing to look forward to if it's just going to be the All Blacks trouncing everyone. They're awesome, fantastic, but the other team plays a part in making the All Blacks look good. And the South Africans did that, Ben. And I think they can have a look at themselves. And if you look at each of those players, there's stuff they can do on the international scale and on the scene. And they will lift for the next game. I've got no doubt about that. Whether it's good enough, I'm not sure. But I think that was one of those amazing efforts by the All Blacks where they just did everything. The balls went everywhere. They were unbelievable.
Yeah, look, and some of the noise coming out of South Africa is they're already looking past to the game against Australia and saying, geez, I hope they can pick up against the Wallabies when the Wallabies turn up over there. Let's get into the game a little bit. I saw Justin Marshall said it was the basics of the way the All Blacks played. Joel Stransky said it was the way that the All Blacks carried the ball into battle. There was a lot of talk about Aaron Smith, and I thought he was the man of the match. I thought, Hansen did show his hand publicly the previous week when he supported Aaron Smith and said he will make a difference. Wonder whether that was to pump his tyres a bit, getting him back into his top form. Aaron Smith was an absolute key to this game, as was the back row. But the short answer is they did everything better. This was the kind of complete performance that the All Blacks aim for. And you're right, they're not going to put it on the park every time, but when they do, they absolutely tore the Springboks limb from limb. And I think that's the way they want to win, of course, clearly. The pace, the power, and that control. Even saw blokes like Crotty hammering into the line late in the game. Every single player was doing their part and smashing it. And I don't think the Springboks had faced such an effective defensive line this year. The All Blacks looked for pace in that defensive line. They got up in their face every chance they had to shut them down, put them under more pressure. Yanti's kicking game was poor. Hugard's kicking game was poor. And that was all because of the pace in their face. The Boks back three was shown up. I previously have been a fan of Raymond Rule, but I was seduced by the pace, as I think they have been. Raymond Rule had almost stamped on him, please don't pick me again for the Boks. The amount of poor tackles he looked at then. Ioane was always going to be a bit of a special for first try score and others because you knew there was a mismatch on that side. But the Boks have to go back to the well on a couple of things. It didn't help losing Creel. It didn't help losing Cronje before the start and Oosthuizen, who was also lost. But really, after that first 10 minutes when they were in it, they went to water.
That's the key. They sort of dropped their bundle completely. And unlike Australia in that first test against New Zealand, they actually showed some gumption and came back into it. But South Africa just lost total interest in after that because, some of their core values, which is line out scrum, just went out the window. The All Blacks were amazingly aggressive though in everything they did, and you can't accuse the All Blacks of conceding anything when they were running. They were going to the line and right through it, and all their replacements did the job that they needed to do as well. It was just an astounding effort. So, 57 blot.
Yeah, but the biggest margin against South Africa by any team, the most points in a game against South Africa, equaling the 57. So the last three games, it's something like 41, 10 or 13 between the Boks and the All Blacks. 41 to 10, 13, 57, 15, 57 zip. The most conversions in a game against South Africa, the biggest halftime lead. I saw some really hopeful stuff. Not as hopeful as Kurt C, the coach, who said there was some, good moments in there or some good lessons he said out of the game, or some positives actually were his words, which was just ludicrous. When you're beaten that badly, son, you're just beaten.
Well, I think the positive is it couldn't get worse.
Yeah. I even saw one South African story which said, at least they did better in the second half. It was 31-0 in one half and 26-0 in the other half. I don't think that's a massive discrepancy
or a real
turn up. So from here, the All Blacks, looking like a canter towards the Rugby Championship title. They look clearly unstoppable. They're off to Argentina, and they can afford to rest about 6 of their best players as they head off to the Argies.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the Argentinians did give it to them in the test the week before, but it certainly was, everything's been there. These games have been in the making for some time. It just all depended what the opposition was going to do. And South Africa just really made it easier for New Zealand to do what they wanted to do. Whereas, you look at a team like Argentina, they're in your face, and we'll talk about that with Australia in that first half, because that was another week where they dominated the first half against their more fancied rivals. So I think in the end, yes, mighty victory to the All Blacks, but South Africa, they know what they need to do. It's pretty easy. They just got to aim up in every department. Don't worry about tweaking stuff. They've got to aim up.
Well, I think the thing you can say is that, there are players in there who are good players, and they clearly didn't play well. The amount of drop ball and poor decision-making that the Boks made there, their heads weren't right, and it was mental disintegration. Once the All Blacks got on top, an intercept try and a nice little flick pass from Beauden Barrett, doesn't help, but they just really went to pieces.
And that's what I mean, mate. They dropped their bundle completely. It would have been nice.
And you're saying it won't happen again, right?
I just can't see that happening again in the next game, because they'll grow another league playing at home against the All Blacks, and I think that we'll see a better side. I just cannot imagine them going through that again, because they're a proud side, and they have shown better signs this year. Can we talk about Beauden Barrett?
We can.
All right. So I mean, we've got to say here that you posed a question last week, Ben. Is Barrett better at 15 than 10? And it was a question, because I think we both agree that he's the best option at 10 at the moment, although you'd like to see Sopawanga in there.
My point was, and I copped a bit of stick on YouTube from a couple of types out there, but my point was, what is the best, strongest lineup the All Blacks can put out there? And that could quite possibly be Barrett at fullback. And, give you as much stick as you like about that as a suggestion, but that's the way they play the back end of their games now. Barrett goes back to fullback, Sopawanga comes into 5'8", so it's not like it's beyond the realms of possible. My point has consistently been, Mackenzie to me is not world class. I think he's a good player, but I think the team would be stronger with Barrett at fullback and Sopawanga at 5'8". Amazingly, they didn't need that against the Boks on the weekend, clearly. It wasn't to say Barrett is a bad player or should be dropped for those who are reading the wrong thing into the headline. It was saying, are there better ways? And they already play like that. Would they get more of it out of it that way? Not sure. They're not going to be making too many changes now, though, I can tell you.
Yeah, that's true. But
Sopawanga will get his chance now in Argentina, seeing as Barrett's not going.
But a lot of the criticism was generated through his goal kicking, which is totally different responsibility what he does on the paddock. But he did it all well, didn't he, the other night? And, from flick passes on the inside, all sorts of crazy stuff, that he just looked Dan Carter-ish for that night.
I don't think he looked Dan Carter-ish. I think he looked Beauden Barrett-ish, and I still don't think he's Dan Carter.
Look,
he was dominant, right? And Aaron Smith clearly, as Hansen called out, has a lot to do with that. The service that he gives is phenomenal, and also the not the pressure he takes off, but what he adds in terms of his decision making at 9, in terms of mixing the game up and putting different thoughts into the defensive line, letting Barrett play a bit deeper with a guy who's that sharp. Smith makes a big difference. Now, Sopawanga's going to get a chance in Argentina, and I hope he goes well. I like him as a player, and there'll be some serious changes there. SBW, I think, clearly is one of those guys Hansen likes, attracts defenders, didn't have much of an impact in the game, which is interesting to say in a 57-0 game. I still stand by, I think Crotty and ALB are your better combo there. We won't get to see that in Argentina because Crotty's not on the plane either.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think about the squad he's named?
It's a luxury. He can absolutely do it. Now, he left out Whitelock and Retallick. The last time they didn't play, they lost to Ireland. So big call there. Tuipulotu, Luke Romano, Scott Barrett. Scott Barrett did very well coming on a blindside. Sam Cane, one of their best players, has been for the last few games. He's not on the plane. Liam Squire is not, which is interesting. So Squire, not necessarily one of their best players, but with the options they've got to try at 6, clearly they're giving a couple of guys a go over there, and Scott Barrett might be one of those. Beauden Barrett and Crotty not there. Tuipulotu, Todd and Kano all called up. Kano's going to be feeling the heat. Barrett looked great at 6. Squire looks good at 6. Fafita looks good at 6. The options that Hansen has, fantastic, and he has this luxury now of rolling some guys into the team and giving them a shot.
It'd be nice if some of those 6s were across the ditch a bit. We could do it with a couple of those.
They got young props with both Moody and Franks out, but the Argies have been getting touched up in the scrum, so you can't expect them to be troubled too much up front.
Yeah, true. However, like I said on previous shows, and what the great Ewan McKenzie has told me many times, winning one scrum doesn't mean you're going to win the next one. So it's all about the application from each task ahead of you, and that includes the entire game. So the Argies could easily man up in the scrum. There's no doubt about that.
To roll into the next game, mate, Wallabies 45, Pumas 20. The problem with the Argies is they can't play a full 80. I mean, that's quite obvious. The Wallabies, up until the 50-minute mark, were under the pump. They kicked away in the last, 15, and the way the Argies started was a real worry. I mean, the quote from Checker at half-time, if I could find that, he said...
Is this Checker Watch?
This is Checker Watch. Just at half-time, and, good on him for being honest here, and it was actually really good to go to the coach's box and hear a comment from him, because often you get a lot of the watered-down stuff, right? Checker is an honest guy most of the time, so, clearly he's had a crack at this. He was saying, I'm not sure we realise we're playing in a test match. Urgency, speed, aggression, all missing in the first half. We're lucky to be only 13-10 behind. And he was spot on. In that first half, I mentioned at the top of the show, back rows, how important Sam Cane is, Kieran Reid, Squire for feet of those guys for New Zealand, and how I thought the loss of Creel for South Africa was important. The back rows, too, very, very clearly important in this Wallabies-Pumas game. We saw, I'll get their names right, the Thomas Lozana and Pablo Matera, the 6 and the 8, were hammering away the way they did against the All Blacks, hammering away around the rucks and the fringes and putting it to the Australians and taking them apart almost. And Creevy had an enormous game. 2, 6 and 8, the three guys I really noticed. The Argentinians looked for that pace and that tempo and looked to break down the Wallabies around the breakdown and maybe one further wide, and they were doing it. They were on top and they should have been further ahead than 13-10 at half-time. But the back row of the Australians came into their own in the last half hour. McMahon had a big second half after not being that dominant in the first half. And Hooper, he kept going as well. Hannigan played his 50 minutes. He's got to go, I think.
Oh, he's ordinary, mate.
But the Argentinians, they flagged and the Wallabies finished over on top of them.
Yeah. Look, you just look at it, Hannigan going into the contact zone and he just gets out-muscled. And his body height's not good enough, and he's just got to get down and work hard. Look, I can understand Checker being excited about him, but they've got to look elsewhere there, and they've got to do it quickly. Just
while I mention it, one of the guys reminded me, Rodney Moe. That's right, Liam Squire's injured with concussion. That's when he came off the field. That's why he's not on the plane to Argentina.
All
right. Now, in that back row, though, I think it should be a crime to play Hannigan and McMahon together. I think you cannot pick a non-physically dominant 6, which is Hannigan. Yep, he's got a reasonable work rate. Reasonably good in the line-out. He's not dominating the rucks. He's missing the mark at the rucks. He's not physically into the game for a big fella. How you can play then a lightweight number 8, as well as Hooper, who's a fairly wider 7, the back row balance doesn't work. We talk about balance a lot on this show. And I think you cannot play Hannigan and McMahon together. 8 and 7, you want fast, loose guys. McMahon made a lot of good yards late. You need a big bopper. You need to think about Lucan Tui or Isaac Rodder the same way that Scott Barrett came on at 6 for the All Blacks. You've got to think about those young, powerful guys who are going to get in and rip up at 6. Because, of course, we don't have Scott Fardy, and I'll say that again.
True, but it also means, like, Pocock's just a bigger force too when he was there at 7. So not having... It sort of doubles that impact you're talking about by having Hooper. Hooper's courageous, and he's actually doing... I've been critical of what he'd come across as a person holding himself for the team, and he's actually doing a pretty good job at the moment. And Checker too, I've got to say, has been pretty well behaved. He was very quiet in the coach's box, where you could tell he's been reserved. Clearly what we've been saying has been rubbing off, and he's been listening and taking our advice, Ben Kimber.
You're taking the kudos, are you, pal?
Yeah, we're taking the credit, all right, for Hansen and Michael Checker. But what did you think of his response after the match?
Oh, look, you could clearly see he enjoyed the win and needed it. One of the things that worries me about those comments at halftime more than that, though, is he seems to divorce himself from the playing performance when they're poor. Like before, we've talked about, it's the fitness that he points the finger a bit. Very much a part of the team, but when the performance isn't going the right way, it's the players. And I feel like that might be part of why we see rotation. Like, I do not understand why Rory Arnold was rotated out of the 23. When Coleman was injured previously and Arnold had to step up and lead that team physically, he did. I thought Coleman and Arnold were starting to get that combination together in the second row, and all of a sudden Arnold is out of the 23 altogether. So whether that's keeping his powder dry for the finish with the Boks and the All Blacks, I don't know. But we don't have the luxury of rotation the way the All Blacks do. And I felt like it would have been nice to see after, particularly that second row combination over the last couple of years, he has really stuffed around with it. He has brought guys in and out and in and out. So to see those guys not get another chance to forge that combination was disappointing. And I'd love to know if the players think it's confusing. You would have known. You would have seen players who've been bamboozled, I'm sure, by selections before.
Yeah.
You've got to see some of these guys who are going in and out and thinking, they must be thinking, what's doing?
Mate, I had plenty of conversations, especially in the mid-90s, as a 7 Djuro ABC, with Australian players who were inexplicably left out of the side, with clearly inferior players playing for them. And half the time you felt like, look, I'm going to have a word to the coach here. What are you thinking? But plenty of players, they do get confused by selection. They obviously say the right thing because they don't want to piss the coach off. Yeah. But yes, to answer your question, Ben, it's a big, fat yes. One of the things I wanted to ask you about too is Bernard Foley was given man of the match. So for the Australian point and for Australia as well, because Curtly Beale in losing teams have been given the man of the match. I don't know what you thought about that, because I thought Beale was, again, wasn't as great probably as in previous tests, but his kick when it worked just shows me he's got to be in there because he can boot it a mile.
Mate, I don't know who does these man of the matches. Do you know who they come from? I mean, when I was a journo, we used to sit in the press box and
I used to get names off
and we'd sort of pick it in the pick in the press box. Do they still do that?
The last couple of minutes, I don't know.
Well, because for me,
it might even be the Fox crew.
For me, they seem to be could be. They pick backs. I don't know why they pick backs. I thought the two players for the Wallabies were McMahon because of his second half, which made it, but also Kepu. Yeah. Kepu had a very good game, I thought. He is the rock for that.
He was hurt early too.
Yeah, he's the rock for that scrum. Yeah. He's the one who's held that scrum together, but he's also popping up in the back line a bit more. Yeah. So I found that confusing. Foley had an okay game. I don't have a massive rap on Foley. I'll give credit where it's due, but no, I didn't think he deserved man of the match. One other point for me that I wanted to talk about, there's a really good story, and I'll try and post underneath. Christy Doran on the Fox Sports website in Australia. His story was the 5 things we learnt from Australia's things, but he talks about Mick Byrne. So Mick Byrne is the skills coach who's come from the All Blacks, was with the All Blacks for many, many years, and was credited with turning them around in terms of skills and getting them working in a much stronger fashion together. Christie's written that he believes, or he's spoken to Byrne about this in the past, that they're starting to see some of the skill improvement there. And he pointed to a couple of moments in the match, so it was quite an interesting read. He talked about Adam Coleman taking the ball with 2 hands to the line as opposed to forwards who are traditionally catch it on the chest and truck it up, which makes it a much easier call for a defensive line, right? A big man's coming, he's going to take it on the chest, he's going to smash us, we just got to put him down. But teaching these forwards to take the ball with both hands, give themselves options. And we saw Kepu and Coleman both pop the ball in this game. And Simmons also, was it better than Bowden Barrett's flick pass?
Yeah, I saw it. It was pretty good.
But Simmons threw a nice little flick pass too. So maybe there's a bit of silver lining in there for the Australians in terms of the way things are going. But overall, you still have to say Cheika didn't turn out a team that was ready to rock.
So on the left wing there, Israel Folau, when he got the ball, was obviously having a big impact when the ball was spread wide. And this goes to our ongoing discussion or demands that they should be kicking to him every single time because he is a handful as well as on the ground as well as in the air. So caused some controversy with his tweet during the week about what's happening in Australia in the political scene. However, he did the job, I thought.
Well, I think Folau's in great nick. Yeah. I think he's he scored 4 doubles this year, the first Wallaby ever to score 4 2-try performances in the 1 year. He looks in great nick. And Mark Ellis sat in this show last year and said you need Curtly Beale to unlock Israel Folau. And now Beale doesn't have a hand in everything, but it feels like that has been a big part of it. Yeah. I think Folau looks great. You talk about that kick to Folau. They talked about it after one game they pulled it out in, and it hasn't really been seen a lot since. Tactically, again, the Wallabies looked challenged. That first half, they didn't know. It looked like they knew what they were out there for. And even in that second half, it was the Argies tiring, going down to 14 men, for the last period of the game. And it was less tactical brilliance and more just relentless. The Wallabies went hard, kept punching away and popping and looking for space. And it wasn't like they tore them apart tactically. It was physically.
And I thought overall Australia did well to just close off the game when things were getting a little bit shaky. But I thought that the Argentinians really didn't bring anything at all in that second half when they had the lead and they really had an opportunity to keep giving it to Australia. Australia obviously came out and played with more focus in the second half, Ben. But geez, I tell you what, I just looking at the Argentinians, They were mindlessly recycling the ball and not showing me any. To me, it looked like they were long odds to even crack Australia.
Yeah.
In that second half.
And it was the physical battle. They started to lose that. That started to turn. And one of the reasons why I think Hannigan cannot be a starting player for the Wallabies anymore, even Jack Dempsey, who I'm still a bit unsure of whether he's up to international standard, he showed a bit of punch and a bit of mongrel about him, I think. So they're going to have to think about how they get that punch in that starting lineup. So again, Rory Arnold for Simmons for me, and Tui, Rodder maybe on that side.
The other thing too, Ben, is a very poor crowd.
14,229
at Canberra's main stadium, the Djuro Stadium. That's terrible. And they'd been there all week, and I know Checker was, they were on a bit of a PR drive, was thanking the crowd for coming out. But once again, I keep trying to hear the noise come through the television, and you can hear it in the New Zealand game, and the commentary was pulsating, it was all happening. But the one in Canberra was just dead.
It was flat, wasn't it?
It was so dead, mate. I turned the league on, and it was pumping. And that's at ANZ Stadium, as you know, a long way from the stands, a long way from the playing surface itself, and yet it was pumping through the sound. You felt like you were at the ground, and it was exciting. Didn't get that opinion for the Australia game.
No, look, I think that's like the second lowest test we've had going around. I think they had 13,000 for Fiji down in Melbourne. It's really poor. It shows the state of the game.
It's in the rugby championship game too.
Yeah, it shows the state of the game. But you've got to worry about the Canberra rugby scene in that regard. They had the Brumbies in a Super Rugby final there a few weeks back, and I think they barely scraped the 10,000 mark. One of the reasons that I thought the Brumbies moved to Melbourne rather than killing the Force, I would have liked to understand more of why that wasn't an option. I don't think you can just look to history and say, oh, the history of this team is great, hence you can't make a change. If they're not getting crowds turning out for this team, that's got to be the very bread and butter, not how many trophies were in the cabinet a few years back. And I'm not saying I would have moved the Brumbies. I said I don't understand why it wasn't explored more. Yeah.
So I think the fact that Australia won the game in Canberra to a small crowd just sort of takes away from the effort that these players have been putting in. And I've been pretty impressed with the way they've sort of bounced back. There was a lot. The language from the side was a lot better, including Coach Checker. It was a much more balanced response. And if you looked at the Boks, where Checker was coaching during the game, you could tell he probably wanted to get fired up. He sort of pulled himself back a bit.
He's an emotional dude, and when he loses, he gets all worked up. And clearly, if he wins, he can feel all right about it.
No, but if you get there's nothing wrong with getting worked up if it's a big moment and it doesn't happen every 2 seconds. But when it happens every 2 seconds, people lose interest and it sort of loses its impact. And it surely can't help you focus on the job at hand. So I thought he looked he looked focused on the job.
Well, let's see Michael Checker turn this team out ready to rock. He's done it once this year, and that was over in New Zealand for a Bledisloe Cup game. Good game to turn up for, but really the June series, he's now suggesting that they knew they'd be running dead in the June series because they had a focus on fitness, and he believes it's paying off now by
finishing off. Yes, we all saw the tape across the mouth.
Yeah, he believes it's paying off now by finishing off games such as against the Argentinians here. But we need to see him get this team mentally right, and not see him just upset in the coach's box because they're not out there doing the thing again. This game against the Springboks coming up, enormous.
Yeah, it is, and I'll refer to it. We normally do this afterwards, but I've just noticed that Darren Ormsby also put a note on the stream tonight that, and I paid attention to this, where Steve Hansen and in particular Kieran Reid said that was one of the toughest 40 minutes his side has played against another side. And it doesn't look like it from the scoreboard.
Which 40 minutes are we talking about?
We're talking about the first 40 minutes against the Springboks.
Yeah.
And we think it's easy watching in the stands, but that just goes to show you how good the All Blacks were in exexecuting when they had their chances against a side that is tough to play against. We know they're hard to play
31-0 felt unlucky for the Boks at half-time. They were getting beaten, but did it feel like a 31-0?
Yeah. See, that's why I'm prepared to cut them some slack and hopefully see them bounce back in the next test.
They are a proud rugby country, and they are cut from hard stuff, so they have to bounce back, particularly at home. But the way it's been going against the All Blacks, they need to find something.
It would have been interesting to see if Australia were playing in that test. What would have happened if the All Blacks came out the same way? Would Australia, buoyed by their second test appearance, come out the same way or a little bit cocky? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. All you can say is that was a beautifully constructed game of rugby, and it was pulled off to a T. And the good thing for the All Blacks out of that too is they're getting some of these young blokes in there.
Yeah.
They're getting some of these other players and exposing them to this. Speaking of young blokes, that young hooker they've got playing for Wellington, I think it is. You see his try against Canterbury. If you haven't checked that out, check that out.
I'm going to check it out after this. All right, now we're going to keep moving along here, buddy.
One more point on it. Carmichael Hunt could be back in the mix.
All right.
Checkers said that he will fit him in the back line somewhere. He could. Don't know. That's a really interesting one.
What do you do?
Well, Beale at 12's working. Hunt didn't really work at 13, maybe won't work at 13. He's not going to play fullback with Israel Folau there the way he's going. But I tell you this, I'd stick him at 6 if I had to, because what they needed in that first half was the kind of ticker that Carmichael Hunt shows every minute. If there's one thing that guy does, it is never leave a spare moment on the park, and he gives everything. So if they need a mental change, then get him in the team. I'm joking about 6, by the way. Don't take me to task on that.
All right, so what about putting Carmichael Hunt at 12 and Kirtley at 10 and moving Foley to the bench?
Now you're talking. That would work for me.
Yeah, all right, let's see. Because I agree. And the other thing, because we know that he's got a great pass. And he can, so imagine that. You got Beale, you could even do a bit of left-right thing going on. So,
and that's right, that hooker's Asafo Amua. That's right. He looks amazing. And he skinned a Canterbury winger on the weekend in the Mitre 10
all right,
Cup.
Ben, we're going to keep going. So
Sure.
last few things.
Fantasy?
Let's go to the Rugby Pass Fantasy League, Ben Kimber.
All right.
How you going there, buddy?
Hanging on to a dominant fourth, I'll say, because you give me shit
All
about
right, okay.
it. So got my team in this week.
Keep it clean, Sean McMahon.
All right, Ruggamatrix comp late charges by Tariq Ibrahim on top, and he's got a bit of a gap on the teams here. He's got 16 points in front, and he's a good 20 odd points in front of me. Fantasy Guru Nick Bowden second. Fantasy Guru, same name, Hien Vu third. I'm in fourth, followed by the Tim Tams bag. I know Sully's turning up on the front page there. One of our mates.
Sully from New York.
Yeah, he said to me, I look bigger in the rearview mirror for you now, mate. He's coming for me.
Oh, look out.
But it's going to be quite interesting now with all these All Blacks changes.
Yeah.
So Barrett will be in a lot of teams. Crotty would be in a lot of teams. Those who brought in Milner Scudder have done well. He really brought some points.
Yeah.
The changing here is going to be absolutely key. Who people have got on their bench, who they can bring in. Creevy had an enormous points game on the weekend.
Yep.
He brought me a lot of, good fortune there. Raymond Rule, I've got to drop out of my side. He cost me points on the weekend, and rightly so. I don't know if he made one tackle. He got brushed repeatedly by everyone who ran at him. But the team for me, I'm kind of solid, but I'm going to have to mix up some serious things this week. And I think the Wallabies would have to feel good going up against the Springboks. But I'm keen to see what the Springboks do, because I suspect Andre Pollard will come into the side. I suspect they'll tinker with their back three, whether we see the likes of Combrink or a few of these other guys who are around the traps come into play. There's going to be a lot to think about the day before, after the teams are named.
All right, so jump on there. Put a team in now. He's probably still haul Ben in.
Oh,
the Rugby Championship
what
Fantasy
number are you
League.
What are you coming, mate?
Oh, mate, I've not looked since game one because I hadn't done a Fantasy League before, so I'll be better next time around. I should enter the Aviva Premiership or the Pro 14, but there it is, the Rugby Championship. Thanks to the top fellas at Rugby Pass. Stream your rugby around the world, all Rugby League as well.
But just on that
Yep.
Springbok back three, I mentioned them earlier, and I just mentioned it then because I will have a look at it. I'll be very interested to see what they do, because the back three, they're fast, but they when the pressure was on, they weren't good enough. So Skasan and Rule, both under pressure, potentially Coetzee. Is it Combrink, Cobus Van Vick? Maybe Yanti should move to fullback when Pollard comes into play, or Warwick Gallant's another name being thrown around. Going to be very, very interesting to see what they go for, what style they go for in that back three for the Springboks, because I think they will definitely see change there.
All right, let's see how they go. But it is an interesting stage of the Rugby Championship. Right, what's next?
2 more quick pieces of news before viewer comments.
Yep, quick, let's
Nick
go.
Stiles under the pump up in Queensland, all the reports
Yeah, what's
here.
going on there? I was looking on social media and he had some nice sort of travel photos.
Yeah, well, mate, some word out of Queensland that they're thinking about getting rid of him and putting
They're
a new
replaced
coach in.
by whom?
Well, rumours of Brad Thorne, but they wouldn't do that surely. He's a complete rookie.
Right.
No way in the world. But they've let blokes go before, and it's cost them money. They can't afford to, so I'd be very surprised to see that happen. Haven't talked about the NRC. We will in future shows. Haven't had enough time to get into it properly. Seen some highlights, seen some things I like and don't like, but haven't had enough time.
Yeah.
Let's do viewer comments.
All right. So let's go to the viewer comments from last week and during the week.
First one is to Ray Miller, who works with me. Dropped me a note at work. G'day, Ray. Hope you're watching.
G'day, Ray.
He said he's a regular. He's over there for Westpac, New Zealand. Brian Knight was on Facebook saying, who picks this watch thingy? Not sure Foley was it. Spot on there, Brian.
Yeah.
Thornet Walker said Wallabies were still way off. James Walker, always great comments. Talks about the standard checker plan of running rugby worked in the second half because the Australian forwards got it together in attack against a tiring team rather than individual tactical imagination, which I agree with.
Yep,
Maxi Utrich gave Sean McMahon
Big
a big
Maxi.
grab. Matt Rad was on there. Herbert Tanavasu. Sam Green was a very happy All Blacks fan. Chris Abel, good comments. Adam Rees. Greg Kerr, who was very upset about the South African game. Said if your hooker can't find the target, neither the starting player or the replacement, then you are going to get hammered. And we had 3 angry emojis there. Seriously, this is your full-time profession, guys. I think Greg summed it up for a lot of guys there. Pam Panapa was marvelling at the 80-minute work from the All Blacks. Kevin Gibb, one of our Irish viewers, said recent results putting Ireland performance in Chicago in perspective. Fair enough. Tony Sick, Chris Brown, and a nice couple of long comments from Jared Thorne.
Jared, yeah.
It's really good stuff.
Good stuff, mate. All right, so that is it for Ruggamatrix International episode 255. Ben, you are heading on leave, I think, next week.
I am.
We'll squeeze a show out before you go.
Yep.
And we might get a special guest in.
Yeah, you might have someone. Well, that bloke who wanted me sacked, you'll get someone in to replace me. See how they go.
I've got an idea, and I won't raise it now, but I'll talk to you off air.
Yeah.
But it might involve someone who posts on here.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think that could be the go. Anyway.
A special guest.
Yeah.
Well, if there's any Ruggamatrix fans in Hawaii, let me know because I'll be selling it up there for a little while.
All right. Well, we might even do a Skype call depending what happens. All right, mate. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, mate.
Good luck with the 4th place. All right, there has been Kimber. That has been Ruggamatrix International, episode 255. As I say every week, enjoy your rugby, and we'll see you next week on the world's most quoted rugby podcast.